Hey guys, so last week something happened that is really huge in the design space, and that is Adobe purchasing Figma for $20 billion. And I know you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with day-to-day design or, learning more about design or anything like that? But it does have a huge effect. I mean, obviously because they're purchasing a software that you may be using, but it also confirmed a lot of thoughts I've been having about Adobe in general over the past 18 months to 2 years. And that is the idea that Adobe is a dying business. And you may be thinking Adobe is the market leader, they have Photoshop, they have Illustrator, how could they be dying? But I think this move to buy Figma definitely signals some weakness, and that the executives know that the landscape is shifting underneath them, and the best strategy to move with the times is to purchase their competitor or their rising competitor. For a long time, I felt that Adobe Creative Cloud is just not worth it, and in the past year, I've actually completed a shift away from them completely. I've left the Adobe ecosystem and I no longer have to pay the subscription fee, and it is amazing. Now, deciding whether it's worth it for you really depends on what you're using it for and what kinds of software you need. I can't speak for everyone, but for me, it comes down to what I do, which is web design. I do illustration, and I also do YouTube. So those are kind of the three main pillars I consider. For web design, I need a UI UX tool. From Creative Cloud, that would be Adobe XD. For illustration, I need both a vector program and a raster program. So from Creative Cloud, that would be obviously Photoshop and Illustrator. And for YouTube, I need a video editing program, which would be Adobe Premiere. Okay, so those are the main software packages inside of Creative Cloud that help me do what I need to do. But now let's look at some free or cheap alternatives that are outside of Creative Cloud. So instead of Adobe XD for web design or UI UX design, I moved to Figma about 2 years ago. And at the time, my employer was actually paying for Creative Cloud, so I had the choice of using XD for completely free, but I still chose Figma over it just because I felt like it was the more feature-rich program, and I felt like Adobe XD was trying to play catch-up in the space, and some of the features were kind of underbaked. The community around Figma was a lot bigger, and now obviously 2 years later it has grown even more and gotten more momentum to the point where Adobe has bought them. Now that this has happened, I haven't come up with another alternative, but let's see what happens with the acquisition. They still haven't rolled it into their software, so there might be a bit of lag time before that happens, and maybe they will allow Figma to operate independently and maintain that free tier. But I'm not counting on it. I've grouped the next two pieces of software together, Photoshop and Illustrator, because they both do the same thing, which is help me do illustration and also do some basic image editing. Now, Photoshop is a pretty essential program and it's been around for years and years, so replacing it is pretty hard. But what I've done is I've replaced it with two pieces of software. So the first is completely free and it's a browser-based version of Photoshop. So if you go to www.photopea.com, it's basically Photoshop. And when I first discovered this, I thought it was absolutely amazing. Like, someone has recreated Photoshop, I think tool for tool, window for window, everything is exactly the same. Now it does have advertising, and that's how they fund their software. And you can also pay to get rid of the advertising, but the payment is a lot cheaper than Creative Cloud subscription. So I still think it's a really awesome piece of software. Now, obviously not everyone wants to do their image editing in a browser-based piece of software. It kind of feels like a light version, and it doesn't feel like you have the stability or, the power of a dedicated desktop app. And for me, I never really used Photoshop for heavy photo editing or anything like that. The only time when I feel like I was using it for a really intensive purpose was for illustration and things like drawing and painting and stuff like that. So instead of drawing and painting in Photopea, which I still think you can do, like they have ways to import custom brushes and all that kind of stuff, I've actually moved my drawing practice over to Procreate. Procreate is an amazing program and it definitely has been a learning curve, but now that it's been more than 6 months, I have gotten the hang of it and I feel completely at home in it. So Procreate is priced at $10 for a one-off payment, and then combined with Photopea, which is completely free, I have essentially replaced Photoshop. So those two programs replace Photoshop, which is the raster portion of my image editing needs, but I also do need a vector program. So what I did to replace Adobe Illustrator was I purchased Affinity Designer. Affinity Designer is less feature-rich than Illustrator, but it also has features in other areas which help it punch well above its weight. I don't know all of the features of Adobe Illustrator, so there are probably things I am missing out on, but the key features that I do need, such as basic vector editing and also isometric grid tools, are in Affinity Designer. And the key thing is Affinity Designer is only a flat fee of $60 and that's it. If you want to find out more about why I switched to Affinity Designer, please check out this video linked up here. So that's it for the illustration section. I basically replaced Photoshop and Illustrator with 3 programs. You got Photopea, which is free, Procreate, which is $10, and Affinity Designer, which is $60 US. So the last piece of software I needed was for YouTube for creating videos and to replace what would be Adobe Premiere in Creative Cloud. Originally, I was using Final Cut Pro, which doesn't have a subscription fee, but its price is pretty high, which isn't ideal, but I was still willing to swallow it because I just wasn't having to deal with recurring costs until I discovered DaVinci Resolve. And DaVinci Resolve is completely free, and their free version is pretty feature rich, and it does all the things that I need to do for video editing. The con is that there is a learning curve. And I mean, I think that is the overall con for this entire process. I think the main reason a lot of people don't want to leave Creative Cloud is because it's what they know and they've been using for so many years. So the switching cost is pretty high in terms of learning. But I think that the learning is actually not that bad of a cost. Like, I think if you just put in the work for a couple of weeks or months, then it's done and you don't need to deal with those subscription fees ever again. I'm not going to go too deep into the benefits of DaVinci Resolve, but I will say that learning it made me realize that while it is difficult to learn, you start to understand why it is difficult to learn. And the reason why is because it's built in such a way to give you so much flexibility, and the workflow that they provide is just, it's hard to explain, but it's okay, so I've given you the alternative to some of the major packages inside of Creative Cloud, but now let's talk money. Creative Cloud is $52.99 USD per month, which adds up to about $635 US a year, which is not a small amount of money, especially if you're just a hobbyist or an amateur trying to figure out stuff and, you know, become pro. And when you compare $635 to the alternative, it really can't compare. So let's look at it. You've got Photopea for free, you've got Procreate for $10 US, Affinity Designer for $60 US, and DaVinci Resolve, which is free, which comes to a total of $70 US. 70 versus 635. It's pretty obvious. But this is where it gets even crazier, or like when you think about it this way, like it really makes you reevaluate the value. So you can buy an iPad Air for $549 US plus an Apple Pencil, which is $129 US. So if you add those two together, you get $678 US, which is just a little bit more expensive than 1 year's worth of Adobe Creative Cloud. Now, of course, that's not going to be your final price because you've got to add on $10 for Procreate and then $60 for Affinity Designer, which is another $70. So that brings you to a total of $748 US. You get software that you don't need to pay for every single month, and you get an iPad Air and an Apple Pencil versus $635, and all you get is software, and you get tied to a subscription that is going to keep charging you years into the future. So I think it's a pretty big no-brainer, especially if you are an illustrator or someone that likes to use a stylus and draw, to go for the option where you buy yourself a brand new tablet, an Apple Pencil, and get all the software. I mean, of course, the price you pay is like the learning curve, but that's just like a couple weeks, maybe a few months before you get back up to speed. And it's really not too difficult to figure out how to do things that you used to be able to do using these new packages. So yeah, that's all I really want to say. I just wanted to get that off my chest because it's been on my mind for a really long time. And yeah, especially because it's been about 6 or 7 months since I've made this switch. I'm starting to feel really at home in this new way of working. And looking back, I just feel like it's insane to be paying these prices for Adobe Creative Cloud. It's a really great way to work, and you save a lot of money, and you also get new gear as well, which is a complete game changer. You know, using the iPad as your drawing stylus is absolutely amazing. So I really would recommend it to you guys, until of course Adobe comes along and acquires the software that you're using. In that case, we're screwed.